Hi, this is David, EV World News, where we talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. Today, I've got the co-founder of Maeving Electric Motorcycles out of the UK joining us, SEB English-Jones. Welcome to our show today, Seb.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're really glad to have you outreach. Now, my understanding is you guys are going to come to California and start. What are you going to be doing in California?
Yeah, but no, very much so. So, I mean, hot off the press. So, we're actually going live tomorrow, and that's when we are basically people are going to be able to place their orders for the first time. As you say, just limited to California because we are direct to consumer. So, we want to be able to actually, we deliver and service bikes ourselves. So, it's important that in the first instance we're starting in a relatively small geography, and the weather in California and the kind of appetite towards two-wheelers is pretty conducive. So we had a lot of inbound requests for bikes out there. So that's why we're focusing on California.
Very nice, very nice. So you guys are based out of Coventry, England. Isn't there a lot
Yes.
of manufacturing in the automotive industry in that general vicinity?
Yeah, there is sort of generally, but it's also where historically all British motorcycle brands were based. I mean, we're really a stone's throw from about 120 years of motorcycle history in the UK, and I think there are very few things that Britain is still famous for in terms of manufacturing. We're not really up there in the charts, but motorcycle design is still one of the things that I think people respect UK manufacturers for, and a lot of people love Triumph and Norton and BSA and these kind of brands. So we're specifically based here because a lot of our engineers have come from Triumph motorcycles, which is just down the road, basically.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Now, what kind of range do your electric motorcycles have?
So basically 80 miles, up to 80 miles. The important thing to understand about our bikes is that they're the equivalent to kind of 125cc to 250cc bikes. They are city bikes. They're built primarily for urban riding in mind. So most of our customers in the UK are basically charging their bike once a week. So you take the batteries out of the bike and you charge them in your apartment, in a cafe, at work. So that's the kind of relationship people have with charging and range on our bikes, as opposed to a plug-in vehicle.
Is there what kind of top speed do these bikes typically have?
So our first bike, which we launched about a year and a half ago, top speed 45 miles per hour. So that's very much limited to city riding. I mean, people do use it outside the city, but it's obviously better in a city. And then our sort of later bike has a top speed of 70 miles per hour. So that's kind of capable of highway riding, but we still think of it as being broadly a city bike or a town bike.
Who are you sourcing your batteries from?
So the batteries, well, along with most cells out there, as I'm sure you appreciate, it comes from China. So I think China make about 90% of the world's batteries, and our supplier is the biggest supplier of two-wheel batteries in the world.
So
nice.
They're
supplying the cells. I assume you guys did the pack design.
Yeah, exactly. We did all the design. They're our partner, but they, I guess just particularly with the lens of the supply crisis, we basically launched our business just in the wake of COVID, and in and amongst the supply crisis, it was very important to have a big supplier who was able to leverage their size, in order to give us security on the cells. So we use LG and Samsung cells, but as you say, they're packaged in a battery that we've designed ourselves.
Okay, so these are cobalt, or are they lithium iron?
Lithium ion, yeah. Okay. And pretty standard automotive cells, so 18650 and 2700 cells.
Okay.
These are really sharp looking motorcycles.
Yeah, I just did a keyword search of the EV World search engine of story. What I do is I will archive links and headlines to the stories, and maybe you got 5 links in the database. So congratulations.
Good. And I'm glad you like the design. I mean, this is very, archetypal British design from the 60s and 70s, the kind of cafe racer, and then also back to the 30s, the sort of turn of the century where bikes were basically evolving from bicycles for the first time.
Right.
very small engines, and very minimalist, a lot of frame, a lot of nice metal exposure. So we wanted to stay true to that kind of design, and we didn't feel that just because you're going electric doesn't mean that you have to kind of throw out all of that heritage, and design something that looks futuristic and has big LCD screens. We wanted to keep it simple and stick to things that a lot of motorcyclists love about bikes.
Now you may have seen this, you may not have. Honda just announced that they are going to be launching 30 different electric motorcycle models. That's some serious competition out there. 30 of them by, I think it was like, they start with the first one something like 2025, and then they start adding them, after.
Yeah, exactly. And of course they already have a scooter. I think the things that the big manufacturers, the sort of bike companies that you might think of naturally when you think of motorcycles, they've been pretty slow to change to this EV adoption. It's really Asia, it's China that's been ruling the roost in the electric motorcycle and scooter market. So I mean, when we just to put it in perspective, when we started this business, there were 297 electric motorcycles and scooters sold in total in the UK. And that same year in China, it was over 20 million. So they completely leapfrogged the rest of the world when it comes to EV adoption in two wheels. They have 80% adoption of electric in the two wheel space. So 80% of registrations on an annual basis are electric in China.
Yeah. Did your team, any of them, have any experience with building? And I forget the exact name of it, but the racing on the Isle of Man. There was a series for about 6-7 years, something like that. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Carry on, Bill.
Yeah, no, I was just saying on the Isle of Man, and keep thinking GP something or another, but I don't know.
The TT race, the Isle of Man TT. Yeah. Our sort of lead chassis engineer, who's also a primary test rider. He races the Isle of Man TT, so he actually has experience in racing himself. He's also a Triumph engineer who had spent 15 years designing chassis at Triumph. So yeah, a lot of experience both on and off the racetrack.
All right. Yeah, I did notice one of the headlines more recent that you're also we're going to launch in France. How's that going?
France has been a bit slow. The Germany and Benelux, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands have been the primary focus. But to be honest, we've had more inbound inquiries from the US than all other markets put together. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that and I think the customer is very different, in the US, certainly to what you find in Europe. But it's been the biggest point of interest. So we're pretty excited to see how it goes.
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that we see with the adoption of electric vehicles, which I really like about what you're doing, is yours just look like a motorcycle. Yours don't look like there's anything different. Nobody, other than I'm sure they're much quieter, nobody would really realize that they were anything different than a gas motorcycle other than the noise, because of the appearance. And I think that's part of the issue is some people don't like the futuristic look of a lot of electric vehicles, or who knows? There's just all kinds of reasons people come up for why they don't like EVs. And
I totally agree, and I think that it's interesting. I think that a lot of people view cars as a sort of way of getting from A to B. I think with motorcycles, it's a little bit more about the feeling that you get from the ride. And I think in a car, people want to have things like seat heaters and climate control and good radio and silence and whatever. On a bike, people want to have a very pure engagement with everything that's going on around you. So you don't necessarily want to have a million features presented to you. It's a little bit more simple than that.
Yeah.
And so I think actually for us, it was really important that we differentiated ourselves by focusing on all of that heritage design. Definitely, but it also actually, sorry, there was something I was going to say in response to that about electric. Oh, no, that was it. It's also a lot of people who are passionate about driving, as I am. I love cars as well. Have not been particular fans of the Tesla. They feel that they get into it and it feels like a a gadget. It doesn't. It feels unfamiliar. There are bits about the steering wheel or the dashboard or
the
the way that
braking.
it feels, the brake, yeah, which are just not familiar to people who are real connoisseurs of the driving experience on four wheels. And similarly, in the bike world, a lot of experts are getting on, these kind of scooters that are coming out of China and feeling that the controls are unfamiliar and the ride is not what you would expect. So I think we've really also tried to focus on making the ride familiar and exciting and all of the things that people like about lightweight motorbikes.
So you feel you're delivering a pure motorcycle experience with your electric motorcycles?
Yeah, I think I'd be careful because I'm very respectful of I grew up loving petrol cars and bikes, and I don't think that electric can replace full-size motorcycles yet. There's not the space on a motorcycle to pack the battery to get the energy density that you need to compete with full-size recreational motorcycles that can take you 250 miles on a single tank. There's just not the battery density. And so I'm not there saying that electric motorbikes and scooters at this point can replace petrol bikes. And I totally understand why people love, old school gas bikes, old school gas motorbikes. I get it. But I would say that this is an electric motorcycle that I believe will excite people in the way that old school motorbikes do. And for those who are willing to explore something slightly new in terms of the look and feel and how it's, what it's like to ride and the experience of charging, if you're open to that, I think you'll like it.
So you have removable batteries in some of these. So you can just plug it in while it's on the bike, or you can take the batteries off and take them inside and charge them?
Yeah, exactly. That's true on the latest bike. On the old bike, you have to take them out to charge them. So the only electric motorbikes and scooters that are selling around the world are removable battery bikes. All the other, for example, we've sold more units just in the UK of our bikes than Harley have of the live wire globally. And the fact of the matter is that there's just, you can understand why. If you're going to spend $30,000 on a bike that you have to plug in and that only gives you 80 miles of range or 60 miles or whatever top speed, it's quite hard to convince an existing rider that that's a better alternative to a gas bike. But if you're able to ride around town, but bear in mind that the number one barrier to electric adoption at the moment is charging infrastructure and the difficulties, the infrequency of charging opportunities. If you can just take a battery out and you can charge it at any standard socket, so whether that's in a cafe, it's at work, it's overnight in your apartment, maybe you don't have a garage, so you live in a small flat in Manhattan. Just being able to take the battery out and charge it at any socket is really important to adoption. And in all countries that have embraced removable battery technology on two-wheel vehicles in cities, the adoption has skyrocketed. As I said, it's 80% in China.
Yeah, we should remind everybody that over in Europe that you use a 50-phase, 50 hertz system, and typically all of those sockets you plug into are what we would call 220, basically voltage, which is the voltage that we use over here for our stoves and air conditioners and things like that. So that gives the charging, makes it a little faster, a little more efficient. So what are your plans, realizing that most people over here, it's a limited number of 220 outlets as opposed to there's 110, 60 hertz everywhere?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, we have a charger for the US market, which fits your different voltage. But it's also worth saying, just in terms of, you're right, it does take a little bit longer to charge, but it doesn't really matter because the common use case for charging is that you get home at the end of a week worth of commuting, you take the battery out and you charge it overnight. I charge my battery, I get home on a Friday, take the battery out and I charge it overnight, and it's good to go the next day. And yes, it takes a lot less time than that to charge. It'll take an hour and a half to get from 20% to 80%, or 4 hours to get to 0 to 100. But most people will just charge it while they're at work or overnight in a way that means that you're not having to wait. You're not sort of sitting in a garage with a cup of tea waiting for it to charge. You're just doing it at a time that's convenient, you know.
What?
Whereas obviously if you're on the motorway.
What's the kilowatt capacity of the battery, the removable?
So it's 2 kilowatt per battery on the RM1, and you've got 2 batteries, and it's 2.7 kilowatt on the kilowatt hours on the RM1S to the left there.
I was going to ask, have you investigated what the California subsidies are for your bikes?
Yeah, well, that's a good question actually. It looks like there are none.
Really?
In the UK, we have a £500. That's what, a $650 subsidy per bike. It's called the plug-in grant, and in Europe, it's much bigger. You know, generally you can get up to about $1,200. But we have not yet found a grant that suits that works for us in California, as far as we can see. But
I really was under the impression there was a $500 or $750 subsidy in California for electric motorcycles. Now, the thing is, they keep changing that stuff, and it's possible they ran out of money already for the year or whatever. You know, like
or that it's it's segmented by there are categories depending on your cubic capacity or your kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Sometimes in some markets there are stipulations around mileage and kilowatt hour capacity.
Our federal regulations all stipulate, then this is on the cars. I don't think there's anything for motorcycles, but that the batteries have to, a certain part have to come from fair trade countries with the US and all that. But when you go to the state subsidies, because all 50 states are different, and that's hard, I think, for a lot of people that aren't from the United States to understand. We are kind of like 50 separate countries that are all under one federal government. And anyways, every state has different subsidies. In some cases, like with a car, the subsidy might be they'll give you $500 to help install your wall charger. Okay. But in other cases, it could be $5,000. Depending on the state. Like Colorado and California have some pretty big numbers on electric cars, but for some reason I thought California was a motorcycle subsidy state. I could be wrong.
It's also worth saying that there's lots of different licensing requirements as well, on a state basis. But look, I mean, the thing that the US that's been amazing at what we see is the IRA funding, the IRA funding, which is hugely encouraging. It's so for a business leader, who has a factory in the UK looking to expand meaningfully into the US, the option to be able to have the cost of our factory and several other kind of items and cost of goods sold going forward to some extent, it's hugely appealing to be able to set up shop in the US and supply the local market. So there are world leading subsidies at a manufacturing base level, but not so much on a customer per bike level, kind of ownership level.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Speaking of California, where are you planning on to basically start as far as your headquarters or whatever you want to
absolutely. So the bike shed in LA, it's a kind of I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a great, it's a great British brand that's fairly recently expanded to LA, and it's just a great hub for bikers, and we're going to have our bikes on show.
People host parties there, don't they? At the bike shed.
They do.
Yeah, great. Because I've seen invitations for parties at that event or at that location.
It's great. They've got clothes, they've got a restaurant, they've got bars. They've got a big community of people. They do test ride days. They've got an electric test ride day. It's a great sort of place to be situated in the first instance.
So Bill and I live in the middle of the United States in a state called Nebraska. People in the UK probably never heard of it. But usually if we tell people that Warren Buffett is from here.
Warren Buffett, yes.
Yeah, then they usually say, "Oh, really?" Yeah,
my neighbor over there.
Yeah. One of my kids was telling me how he ran into Buffett in a McDonald's a few days ago. Buffett was in there on his laptop just working in a McDonald's.
I was going to say, Bill, if he's your neighbor, then he must live in a good neighborhood.
Well, surprisingly, he's lived in that house for what is it, like 50 years? He bought it for like $30,000 or something like that 50 years ago.
Inspirational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
I've met him a couple of times, but
Hmm.
you still wouldn't know me from Adam. So you're going to locate in you're going to start in Southern California, LA area. You've got,
Yeah.
personally know of two other electric motorcycle companies that are origined there in California, basically up in the Santa Cruz Bay Area.
Hmm.
So how do you sort of think you're going to, I mean, Zero's been around for quite a while, and oh, come on, I can't, he's going to hate me because he's a good friend of mine. I can't remember the name of his company, but they're in the Bay Area. It's
Yeah,
also
I
got,
think, look, I mean, the way that we see it is, I mean, the more the merrier to some extent. It's such a nascent category, and we're all, most of us are fighting for the same thing, which is to get as many people onto electric transport as possible. And we're still at a stage where you're looking at like 2%, 5% adoption. And most of these companies are doing quite different things. Zero are trying to compete with full size gas bikes, and are probably the best company in terms of making a really good quality product that does that and puts forward the best case for a full power bike. We're more interested, as I said, in that kind of city, urban commuting space, lower capacity, smaller, lighter bikes that are really good for nipping in and out of traffic in a kind of city space. So I just think that all these companies have something slightly different to offer.
so one of the reasons why, well, I was going to say one of the reasons I brought up Nebraska is because we don't even have very large motorcycle adoption here in Nebraska.
Yeah.
Now, our weather isn't great. We're not a
Yeah.
great state for for that. We're
Nor are we here.
probably, yeah, we probably have 5 months that it would be good, riding weather for a motorcycle
Yeah.
here, and that's really about it. And it's probably very similar to the UK. But you see, I don't know if you want to answer this or not, but I'm curious what kind of production numbers you've seen and sales you've had in
Yeah.
in the UK for bikes or motorcycles.
No, absolutely. Well, just to sort of comment on your first 2 points there. The first thing I'd say is that with the weather, the UK is not famous for for good weather, and it's generally quite seasonal here. So people tend to ride more in the summer, obviously, in the late spring and early autumn or fall. But it's that increases when you're looking at urban riding. If you're only doing shorter distances, 8 miles here, 8 miles back, and I believe the average commute in the US is 16 miles. So there's plenty of people who are doing short distances, and that's double the commute that we have here in the UK. They tend to ride more year round because there's not enough time to spend on the bike to get cold. In markets where there are more recreational riders, then you absolutely would be putting your bike away for the winter, because it's not fun riding for 2 hours on the highway, in -3. That's not fun. And then the second thing I'd say is, because you were saying that there aren't many motorcyclists in Nebraska, we have specifically designed our products to be appropriate for and geared towards non-riders, new riders. We want to get as many people onto electric transport as possible.
Nice.
So we're trying to put forward the kind of Southern European and Asian ideal, where everybody is riding a bike, even if you're like a 90-year-old grandmother or a 16-year-old kid. We believe that it is the best form of transport, and that a future where people are actually choosing to have a lightweight electric two-wheeler instead of a big electric SUV is a better future, because you're putting a lot less demand on lithium supplies and all those precious metals. It's a lot better for the planet. And anyway, so that's just a couple of thoughts there. We're currently in the kind of, so all our bikes are hand built at the moment. We're making about 5 to 7 bikes a day, and we're just moving to a bigger factory literally this next month, where we'll be
Nice.
where we can make up to 60 bikes a day if we wanted to. So capacity is increasing a lot there.
All right. So weird question. What brought about the name Maeving? What does it mean? And how did that come about?
It's a good question. It's derived from an old English word which is maven, which means a connoisseur, an expert, a thought leader. It's basically a commitment to driving progress in the electric space, and eventually always making products which are more discerning and pushing the boundaries versus the other products out there.
This is just a own comment as a marketer. I would highlight that underneath the title of the name Maeving on your website, because the word itself is very similar to something like Mei Ling in Chinese, which means like pretty
Yeah.
girl.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, it almost sounds. I was like, man, that name. I'm sure it has a meaning, but it sounds almost Chinese. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's a British bike, and how do you push, that, that British,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
know, feel
You
to it.
put a
And
Union Jack on it, Jack.
yeah, well, you can do that too.
That was actually something we were told in the first, that the Union Jack thing. We were told that at the first show that we went to when we unveiled our bikes in 2021. Yeah, it was at the biggest British motorcycling show. It's called Motorcycle Live, and they said, how do we know this is British?" So we put a tiny little Union Jack sew onto the stitch seat, and a kind of badge on the side of the bike. But it's very subtle. We haven't done what Mini have done with the Cooper, where you've
Right.
got Union Jack lights, that kind of thing.
Have you had a chance to have Bobby Llewellyn and the guys over at Fully Charged test the bike for you?
Well, we've had Fully Charged in the UK have tested the bike and reviewed it, but I'm not sure about a kind of US equivalent. I mean, we've only just sort of sent out notes to all of the the big trade publications in the US saying, "Hi, we're here." As you know, David, "Hi, we're here. We'd love to speak to you." But we've been very lucky with the review space in the UK. I mean, as far as we can see, we're one of the best, if not the best, electric motorcycle, reviewed electric motorbike. So it's been a good start. It's been a good start.
There's been a lot of hand wringing about the whole Brexit thing, and particularly on the electric vehicle side, and getting them into Europe and tariffs and things. So how's that impacted you guys?
So first of all, it's a nightmare, as in none of us here, would have liked, we all wish that we could rewind the clock and not have made that decision. It's from a sort of doing business with Europe from a kind of litigious paperwork perspective, it's a nightmare. We certainly lost plenty of money overnight in foreign exchange, just from various things that happened. But on a practical level, the good thing is that we took the decision to go through what's called the EU homologation process. So it's the kind of most stringent set of tests. It's the most stringent testing regime for an automotive product. And having been through that and got that certificate, our bikes are now legal across Europe and the UK, and now as well America, which has a sort of slightly less rigorous system, but it's still still a great standard. So our bikes are fully legal across Europe, and there is no we don't pay any. There are no taxes basically on our exporting to Europe because of the quantity of parts that are made in the UK and Europe, which is very high. But the paperwork exercise of dealing with all the different countries and is still a nightmare. And I certainly wish we hadn't made the decision as a country.
Do they meet U.S. emission standards?
Sorry?
Do they meet U.S. emission standards?
Yeah, not too hard. The changes to the US is so minimal. It's like indicator width and things like that. It's basically not a problem. It's a paperwork.
There's a video online somewhere of some police officer giving somebody a ticket for parking in an electric vehicle charging space that's driving a Tesla, and he doesn't believe the guy that it's a that it's an electric vehicle because it doesn't look like an electric vehicle to him. Whatever an electric vehicle is supposed to look like. I guess he thought it was supposed to look like a golf cart. So it's so you get weird stuff.
So I was going to ask about there's obviously you've had concerns with fires of small electric scooters and bicycles over there. We've had the same issue here. So what kind of reassurances do you plan on giving American customers that these bikes aren't going to secretly in the middle of the night go up in smoke?
Yeah, no. I mean, I suppose what I'd say was that the whole reason that you choose the biggest and most reputable supplier of two-wheel vehicles in the world is in order to avoid that kind of process. When you work with top-tier suppliers, whether it's our battery supplier or whether it's Bosch, for example, who we work with on our powertrain, they make the best hub motors in the world. They have rigorous testing regimes that they subject your product to. So they won't, because of their reputation, they won't let it into the market without putting it through. I mean, for example, Bosch put our motor through 200,000-mile life cycles. No one's going to ride that on the bike, but they want to make sure that there are going to be no issues. And the same is true with the batteries. And then when you add the testing regime that we were just talking about, the homologation process, you're by the time the bike has hit the road, this is not a cowboy business, sort of selling prototypes. This is an automotive product that's been through the most rigorous testing regime you can imagine. So needless to say, there have been no issues with any of our batteries, and we would expect that to continue to be the case.
Good.
All right. Yeah. Shall we move on to our news of the day, Bill?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Right. No, let's talk about what's going on with 4,000 U.S. car dealers have asked President Biden to slow down proposed emissions regulations designed to ensure that 2/3 of new passenger cars are all electric by 2032. And the dealers are saying consumers aren't interested and EVs are stacking up on their lots. What do you got to say, Bill? What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's not 4,000, it's 3,800 and some odd number, so it's not quite, but it's over 3, but it's less than 4. But still, interestingly, 20 of those are, I think, Woodhouse. I believe it's Woodhouse.
Really?
Oh yeah,
our local guys. Yeah,
they've got dealerships here in across Nebraska, and I think down in Missouri, and they got like about 20 dealerships. So basically, what they're saying is that they can't sell these cars at the rate at which the car makers would like to see them selling them. So they're asking the administration, because the Biden administration has set guidelines. 60% of all the cars sold, new cars sold in 2030, need to be zero emission. And then, of course, that number in 32, it goes to 66 or 70%, something like that. So gradually ratchets up. And of course, they're saying that, hey, we can't, Americans don't want these cars. We can't sell them. Stop forcing us to, have buy a product, and then try to sell it at a profit to people who don't want them. Interestingly, there was a report done, I think it was the Washington Post or somebody, and I've actually linked it off of that Editor's Choice to a article that says that the real reason, from the article author's perspective, the reason that electric cars aren't selling well in America is because of the dealers.
Yeah, I've seen dealers arguing against that. Yeah, because the big thing is the dealers marking up the prices, the dealers not knowing what to sell. I've read all kinds of. They don't know
anything about electric cars.
I've seen all kinds of stories of customers going to look to. They had a car in mind they wanted to buy, and the salesman kept trying to steer them away from buying the electric vehicle because they didn't think it was a good idea.
And they also point out that because electric vehicles, and we'll get onto this when we get to the Consumer Reports, but because electric vehicles are simpler and have fewer parts, they may not make the same amount of revenue they would by having you come in and change your oil and rotate your tires and re-gap your spark plugs or whatever it is that they're going to do. So they're obviously, these are multi-million-dollar, in fact, probably some of them billion-dollar concerns. And now you're coming in with a policy that basically they see as a way of putting them out of business. Because look at Tesla. Tesla has no dealerships, and yet they are the #1 electric car company here in the United States. As you know, I was just in Seattle. And I spent 10 days in Seattle. And if there is a wake-up call for car makers, is to just simply drive around North Seattle, around Edmonds and Everett and that area, because you cannot miss the huge number of Teslas that are on the road there in Seattle. I went there when I first went there 3 years ago. I used to count them. Oh, there's a Tesla. Now I don't even bother because they're everywhere. you'll have 3 Teslas in a row, and you'll have one behind you and one parked along the side of the stop. They're just everywhere. It is phenomenal. Now, part of that is my daughter, who we stayed with, happens to live, it's probably 6-7 miles from the Tesla distributorship, the service center. So that
Right.
may contribute to that somewhat. But my goodness, there are a ton of cars there. So obviously, if you're a car dealer and you're driving around and you're seeing that the dominant make and model is a Model 3, now increasingly a Model Y, and then of course every now and then you'll see an X, you'll see a Model S. But wow, it just, from my perspective, being in this thing for 25 years, it's phenomenal. So I could see where they would be concerned about, holy crap, here's this, we aren't seeing the F-150s out there. I saw one Mustang Mach-E. I saw several Rivians. That was probably the number 2 car that was out there. Rivian pickups and Rivian, the S, what is it? Anyway, the Rivian.
The truck's the R1T, the SUV's the R1S.
Yeah. So that's got to be a wake-up call for those dealers. So I can see why they're concerned. The problem, of course, is that they don't apparently appreciate the fact that we are facing, as our guest talked about, the consequences of a rapidly warming planet. They came up. COP28 started today, and that was the very first news report I heard today. Was this warning about what's happening to the climate on a global basis? As you guys, as our guest knows, you're starting to get some really crazy weather there in the UK that are coming through. And there's another, we could talk about how you make people aware of that and the problems. But so they're concerned. I hope to God that the administration sticks by its guns. There may be some room for some left movement there and things, but we seriously need to get this problem, and they're already saying forget 1.5, centigrade Celsius, improvement. We'll be lucky if we can stick at 2, and all it's going to cost us. So obviously, these dealerships are looking at their most immediate bottom line and not looking at the longer term picture. It's new, it's different, it's a paradigm that they've been used to for the last 100 years. Changing.
But at the same time, EVs keep growing every year by a big amount over the previous year as a percentage of total car sales in the United States. And so they're selling. It's just they're selling mostly on the coasts, and the West Coast in particular.
Well, then there's logistical and energy and a bunch of other political reasons. Being in the middle of the country, we have we don't have as much of a charging structure for people and things like that. So there's reasons for that, and it's new technology. It's the second most expensive investment that a typical American will make, and I assume probably in Britain it's the same way. That car is hugely expensive right after the home you bought.
One of my big complaints is that in the United States, the U.S. manufacturers, other than Ford, have intentionally tried to make the EVs unappealing, with designs that have been unappealing and things like that for the U.S. market. And I just, I think that's been a lot of it.
Yeah, you probably saw the story that we would have, given the shift to electric vehicles that happened over the last 8-9 years, that we would have decreased our emissions, automobile related emissions, by 30% if we had not introduced SUVs. And all the swing that we all made to SUVs completely nullified all the positive progress we made by people buying those Teslas and other electric cars.
I saw that. I thought that was one of the most interesting. That's something that I guess we feel passionate about, because from our perspective, there are so many journeys where, bear in mind that most journeys that people make are relatively
Hardly a space from the front yard to park a car. Much
no,
less.
no, absolutely.
Everybody has to park on the street.
And there's a trend that you're probably seeing in European countries, actually, so sadly not the UK yet, of going for really small electric cars, tiny, almost like toy, sort of,
Yep.
Like smaller than a Cooper.
Oh
yeah, really small.
small.
Kind of smart car size, but smaller, and everyone's riding around because you don't. There's a bit more of an acceptance that it makes sense when you're trying to park in a tiny street in Milan or Florence or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas in the US, you just don't see that. I mean, you don't even see the cars that are most popular here, which are hatchbacks. We call them hatchbacks. Just like.
Right.
Things like VW Polos and that kind of thing. You don't really get Audi A3s. You don't really get that as many of those cars in the US. Everyone's driving a pickup or a big SUV. So it's a lot more prominent.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that a lot of times the driving concern was that for families was the concern that, well, I don't want to be driving a small car when everybody else is driving a big car. And so I need my next car purchase needs to be on an equivalent basis with the big cars that I have to deal with. And so that's what, because safety is what drove a lot of those large SUV sales. And of course, not thinking, I mean, we, very seldom we have stickers on the side of cars called Baroni stickers that'll show you what your miles per gallon should be and on the highway. And and they show, well, this is what it would cost you, each year to drive this car. But I don't think anybody pays any attention to those. Well, I know I'm going to have to buy gas, so. But then after they get it, they have to, pay $100 to fill their gas tank, and it's even worse. Obviously, it's even worse over in the UK because you pay by the liter.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, presumably the cheaper cost of gas in the US has been a factor there. I think people are a little bit more concerned about fuel consumption in Europe than they are in America, for sure. Yeah.
All right, Bill, you want to talk about the other article?
Pardon?
You want to talk about the other article real quick?
Let's talk about Consumer Reports. That's probably the biggest one. Consumer, I don't know if you're familiar or not, but Seb, Consumer Reports is a well-respected independent testing company here that's been around for 50 years or longer, that looks at all types of consumer products and then puts them through tests and reviews them and then writes that up. So part of their, everything from refrigerators to televisions to, food dry, clothes dryers, whatever.
Got it.
So every year they come out with a review of most reliable automobiles based on surveys of, several tens of thousands of, people that are car owners. And the most recent one they came up with, which gets a lot of play here the last day or so, has been a review that electric plug-in cars, they call them plug-in cars, have 79% more reliability issues than do what they call conventional cars, which are obviously, internal combustion engine vehicles. And so the worst of the group, there's battery electric vehicles like straight Teslas. There's plug-in hybrid vehicles that are sort of a mix of the internal combustion and fully electric. And then, of course, there's the hybrid. The most reliable is the hybrid. The least reliable is the plug-in hybrid. And somewhere in the middle between those is your electric car, with the exception of Tesla. And they gave the Model Y a recommendation, and they gave the Model 3 a recommendation. So that means that you can expect some problems, but you'll generally be happy with it. So that what strikes me there, of course, is that Tesla, as they point out in the article, is that the Tesla has probably been the longest in manufacturing over a stretch of time. in manufacturing fully electric vehicles. They never got into plug-ins. They never went to hybrids, whereas the car makers tried to kind of tiptoe into this whole electrification thing with hybrids. It was 25 years ago, no, almost 26 years ago now, so next month, that I actually drove the very first Prius in the United States at a trade show down in Orlando, Florida. And then later, they gave me a car to test drive for 4 months the following year. So I'm one of the earliest Prius drivers in the state of Nebraska, and I have one parked in the garage upstairs. So Toyota makes the most reliable hybrid because they've been doing it for 25 years. The rest of the car makers, this is all fairly new game to them. You know, as you're probably aware, Volkswagen's had some. Their problem isn't so much with the mechanics of the cars they build, the EVs. The problem tends to be the software that they try to control. They've had some serious issues that have basically shut down production lines and things like that to try to resolve.
Yeah.
So this is all new technology. And so I'm afraid that a headline like that is going to say, I'm not going to buy an electric car. They're nothing but problems. What the article didn't mention is that in the case of hybrids, guess which cars are the most liable to catch fire in the plug-in field, the electric field? It's the hybrid, strangely enough. So at one point, they say it's the most reliable, but then another group looks at the numbers and says, well, if you're talking about vehicles that are prone to catching on fire, it's hybrids. But even at that rate, they're generally less than what a conventional car, the fire rate among conventional cars. So it's all new technology. I think probably another 5-10 years, by the time we get to 2035, 2040, most of that's all going to be resolved, and it'll be the internal combustion engines that are going to be getting bad reviews, and not the electrics. At least from what I've seen over the last quarter century in this business, that tends to be the direction things go. So that's enough of my spouting off. Sorry, Dave.
That's all right. That's all right. That's good. And Tesla had some news today. Today is the rollout of the Cybertruck, right?
Yeah, 2:00 our time, 3:00 East Coast time. So, and of course that would be what, noon on out in Tesla country out in California. So
yeah, so that's a pretty big thing. We expect that to see a lot. It's interesting because people, we're talking about how big vehicles are here in the United States. I was looking earlier, the Tesla, the long range version, has a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. That is just crazy. That would be like what, 10 or more hybrids, 20 hybrids.
Well, that's isn't it less than isn't it more than the Hummer? And I thought Hummer was.
That's a big battery. Yeah, I was looking at stats for how long to charge that thing from nothing to like 90%, and it was on a home charger. It was like 21 hours on a level 2 charger.
Oh yeah, but
this is huge. Huge.
Yeah, this is their very first 800 volt vehicle.
Yeah.
So that's going to make a difference in it. That they've thought about that with their charging system. So if you take it over to home, that's one thing. But if you take it down to the latest generation, Tesla Generation 4 supercharger, that probably becomes a little more reasonable in the hour or a little more than an hour. I mean, some of these things at 800 volts, you could probably get something in the neighborhood of 1,000 miles in an hour of charging.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, like Seb was talking about our need for giant vehicles over here. they're, and they're going that route with the Cybertruck. And one of the things is they expect a lot of people who would normally not drive a truck to buy these.
Yeah.
That
They
it's not
got what?
necessarily the people switching from like a Ford F-150. They're expecting people who want Tesla to buy these,
Yeah.
not because it's Tesla, not because it's a truck. And so it's an
Mm.
interesting kind of perspective. Now they are looking at the idea of making it so that the bed cover could be solar. I don't know that,
Yeah.
they've started coming out with that yet, but it's interesting just kind of to see. But
I,
they'll
I'm
you
I'm actually not as I'm not as close to the Cybertruck as I ought to be. When it first came out, I did a lot of sort of research into it. But is it it's interesting hearing you talk about the customer there. Is it supposed to be a practical vehicle, or is it a design led? Is it ultimately a kind of crazy design that you're going to get
I
young
think
kids
it
buying it?
so in the United States, the best-selling vehicle, I believe, is the Ford F-150 pickup truck. Okay.
Yeah.
And most of those people aren't really using it to do work. Okay.
Mm.
I understand, I talk to people all the time in the construction trade about, whether an electric truck would be a good choice for them. Because one of the big things is so far, electric pickup trucks haven't held up well with a big load or if you're having to tow equipment. Okay, and we're
Yeah.
talking people who really make a living with their truck.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
not just people that drive to work with their truck, but they're actually making a living with it. And for them, um, the issues aren't there. Dodge is coming out with a new hybrid truck that only has
Mm.
an electric drivetrain, but it has a gas generator with
Yeah.
it that's going to have about a 700-mile range in a couple of years, but it's going to have 650 horsepower, and it should still be able to tow. And it sounds to me that like that Dodge Ram is going to be what a lot of contractors need. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
my own view. Even though I look at because the Rivian R1T is pretty amazing, the Cybertruck looks like it's going to be a
Mm.
pretty amazing vehicle and all that. But for practical purposes, for the general contractors and subcontractors for construction and other things like
Yeah.
that, that design um, with the Ram pickup truck seems to be what's going to be a winner, and it's going to cut down significantly on their operating costs because it's going to be so much cheaper to operate than because a lot of these guys are spending a couple $100 a week on fuel.
Mm.
Okay, as
Mm.
it is, and that it's going to dramatically drop their fuel costs because of the extended range from the electric, and it's also it's a plug-in, so they can plug it in at night, and then
Yeah. What's
the
it?
gas part.
150. Yeah. 150
It's like a
miles.
150-mile range on the
Yeah.
plug-in. But if you're towing a 8,000-pound trailer, that cuts down to about 50 miles.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it cuts significantly. So yeah, but I think most people are going to be driving the Cybertruck for daily
For,
driver.
For driving an unusual, yeah, unusual
Yeah,
Tesla. So,
right.
okay, quick poll. David, do you like the looks of the truck, Cybertruck?
I think it's interesting. I don't have any negative thoughts on the Cybertruck. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff. I have a lot of respect for Elon Musk. I think he does a lot of good for humanity, regardless of how quirky the guy is. He does things that I believe that he believes he's doing things not necessarily in his own best interest. Okay, that he's not really looking because
Yeah.
he
Twitter
obviously
being
doesn't
an
need the
example.
money. Yeah, Twitter being an example, but I mean, even there, he's truly become the champion of free speech, and so love it or hate it, I think, yeah, I think he's done a lot of things, and he's put his own reputation at risk to do some of these things, um, and my dogs disagree.
Your dog agrees.
Yeah, maybe they're
Okay,
very vocal about it.
okay, Seth, you like the
What
looks
do
of
you
the
think?
Cybertruck?
Geez, I can't believe I'm going to say this because every inch of my bones usually would say no because it's just I like classic design, but it's so out there that I've got a bit of respect for it, and I imagine that when I see one in the flesh, I'll think it's pretty spectacular. So
Yeah.
no, it doesn't. It does not fit with any of my pre-existing desires, but I I don't hate it. I've got a sort of healthy respect for it somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm sure American truck culture is pretty foreign to Europeans, you know?
It is. It is. I mean, it's great. Honestly, every time I was in LA sort of a couple of months ago, and I just the size, the size of everything, and these big square, bonnets. I drive a Mazda MX-5, a tiny two-seater convertible that's like the kind of British, sports cars of the 70s and 80s. It's a quarter of the size of the average
Right.
American family car, but and I like sort of old Jaguars, but no, the Cybertruck it's outlandish enough to be something completely on its own. Remember my issue with Tesla with the Model S and 3 and has been that ostensibly they look relatively normal on the outside, and then on the inside they feel like a gadget. But the Cybertruck is so extraordinary that it's not stuck in between the old and the new in a way that seems to not succeed in either juncture, if that makes sense.
It's clearly out there.
Yeah, the thing is that I guess I have to admire about Elon is the fact that he and his teams that he has a way of staying on and getting in the public consciousness without even seemingly trying. They don't have to spend, and now they're starting to spend some money on advertising, because generally they've, what's it been? Well, let's see, 2006-ish and things when he took over Tesla. 2012 when it came out with the Model S. 2008 with the Tesla Roadster, which of course was a Lotus, souped up to be electric. In fact, that was kind of in your neighborhood, wasn't it, Seb? Doesn't Lotus?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and it's funny. That is obviously a company that represents, or certainly used to represent, the complete opposite thesis of just add lightness and small and purely very much a for the drive kind of company. But yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
Great British brand.
So they just has this way of just staying in the. If you were to do, and I've done this, if you do, in fact, I even have a feature on the website that shows you who gets the most media coverage, by industry and by country and things like that. Tesla just crushes every other car company in the world. They just, well, here, let's see if I can. Now I won't do it. It takes too much time. But they spend not a dollar on advertising.
Yeah.
Unless you factor the 44 billion they spent, that Musk spent on Twitter.
Yeah, well,
whether that's been good or bad.
yeah.
Anyways, this has been a pretty long show.
So,
Seb, we really appreciate having you on.
lots of luck, Elon, with the everybody's predicting that it's it's a manufacturing nightmare. Even he said it's a manufacturing nightmare to build that thing. So it'll be real interesting to see how they, come out, how they meet quality control and gap issues and technology issues with the batteries and all. It'll be interesting. I hope that it's not a repeat of Twitter.
Right, I understand. It's well, Seb, it's been a delight having you on our show, and we went a little longer than I planned.
Wow, an hour?
Yeah, I know.
Sorry about that.
We very rarely broke 30 minutes before.
Yeah.
So
I'll put that down to the quality of the conversation.
There you go.
It's the quality of the company. Yep. Thank you, Seb.
Right. Well, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and cut the broadcast. Everybody, thanks for listening in. Please like and comment if there's something you'd like to ask, and I can pass on questions, maybe follow